This paper looks at a vision of what could be when we are not in an overwhelming sensory environment. This paper is really cool because it did some really original stuff.
They talked down on self-reports right from the very beginning.
So what did they find?
Something really interesting.
Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking to you about something that I think a lot of you are going to relate to. You might have been chatting about this amongst yourselves, but maybe not realizing that it's related to ADHD. And that's basically different kinds of processing, auditory processing, tactile sensitivity, and whether it's related to ADHD and ADHD symptom severity itself, which is very, very cool. And it's nice to see these papers coming out. So we've got two papers for you today. And yeah, we'll definitely be talking about our own experiences with sensory stimulation as well, I'm sure. So the first paper comes from the Journal of Psychiatry, and it is about altered somatosensory, which we'll explain, processing in adult ADHD. Specifically, they were looking at whether tactile sensitivity and integration is more prevalent in ADHD and whether it is related to ADHD symptom severity. So, how did they do that, Sarah? What was the method? Tell us about somatosensory evoked potential amplitudes, because I had to look that one up.
Yeah, so if you're thinking that this sounds like sensory processing stuff, you are so right. Somatosensory means like anything relating to sensation. It can occur anywhere in the body. So pretty much just like sensory stuff that happens in your body. Really cool that they're studying this. They pretty much come right out in the beginning and say that this is well documented, like anecdotally, but empirical evidence is scarce and ambiguous and focuses primarily on children. So these people looked at grown-ups.
Which is amazing.
So they looked at 27 adults with ADHD, 24 without. They, had them sort of at 4 different conditions, like positions.
Tell us about the conditions, Sarah, because when they discuss the conditions, I have to admit they made my skin crawl a little bit.
So first I have to put it on, right? First I have to tell you that in order to measure this test, they had to put an electrode on your body and then they were going to shock you with the electrical stimulation. So the SEP, the somatosensory evoked potential amplitudes. They pretty much hooked an electrode up to the base of your left thumb so that it would stimulate the radial nerve. Yeah, that's what it said, which is the one that sort of goes all down your arm. It's called the peripheral nerve. Anyway, and so they hook you up here. They give you this, the test, and then they just let you be at rest. They measure you. Totally fine. They measure you again while you're stroking your own arm. They measure you again while someone else is stroking your arm. And then they measure you again while you're just stroking something else.
I was telling Sarah before we came on the podcast, whoever had that job is quite funny. You come home from work, how was your day today? I stroked people's arms for science. It was important.
I don't even know what to say. That is quite the dinner conversation.
Yeah. What are you studying? Well, you're doing really important research. But the thing is, and I think you said this before, this is really important because, and I think this paper or some other paper was mentioning, these things are really hard to test because you don't want to expose somebody to terrible experiences, and terrible oversensory experiences happen very randomly in real life. So it's very hard to test this. And so they were doing something with, that early sense, not necessarily going for broke, but kind of going, okay, well, if you feel uncomfortable doing this, you're probably going to feel uncomfortable if somebody hugs you and you weren't ready for it, or you didn't want to get a hug or something like that. So it's kind of giving you a sense of that without having to go through, no one's hugging you and then you're hugging yourself, which would be a whole different experience.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, they also describe these as non-painful pulses and that there's a maximum range for what they were administering. Now, I don't know. I've had like a nerve test before where they've done this, and I found it physically painful. So I don't know if there's anything different between like this one and the one that I had. I would imagine it was a different nerve. I also should mention that they ran, they did surveys on them as well. Mostly they were looking at ADHD symptoms.
That makes sense.
No, so they didn't measure ADHD symptoms based on a survey. They measured it with an infrared camera and a reflective headband. So this is like some pretty high-tech stuff called the QB test. And they were monitoring your head movements for like a 20-minute button press task. Basically, if you had a higher score on this, then it indicated more severe ADHD symptoms. So I can only imagine that if it's measuring like your movement during a test, it's probably looking for like going back and forth, maybe just like zoning out. So like lack of movement, things like that.
That's so interesting that they did that. Like a totally additional complicated test where most people would have just put a survey.
Put a survey.
I love that.
Right.
I will say, this paper is really cool because it did some really original stuff. I've never seen the QB test. I've never seen the idea of somebody else stroking your arm. Like these people were very creative thinkers.
So it makes a lot of sense because they talk down on self-reports right from the very beginning. So they were like, okay, I mean, I guess we'll include the self-report scales as well, but then we're also going to do this objective measure of symptom severity. Okay.
They had to put their science where their mouth was.
Yeah, okay. I also want to say that they excluded a lot of people. So pretty much anyone with any kind of psychiatric comorbidity, anyone who experiences chronic pain or has substance use. Really, they just wanted to look at like the most pure ADHD. I don't know if you can hear my quotes.
Yeah, air quotes happening around that. Yeah. And they ended up with only 27 adults with ADHD and 24 controls as a result, probably.
Right.
So what did they find?
Well, they found that people with ADHD self-reported greater tactile sensitivity and also received the higher scores on that QB test than compared to the controls, which is pretty much what you would expect. Those values were correlated with each other, which means that like the relationship was connected. And it also showed that the ADHD participants had like a lower tolerance for the nerve stimulus. So sort of like what I was suggesting earlier, it said that it was a non-painful stimulus, but I don't know. Anyway, so clearly the ADHD participants were more reactive to this stimuli.
Yeah, and what about the arm touching? I'm so interested. Like, did we react worse? Because I can imagine no one reacted well to someone else touching their arm.
Okay, so it does say on the bottom of page 6 that they found differences in the amplitudes from self-touch and other touch compared to the neurotypical group.
Oh, that's interesting.
It says participants with ADHD considered the SEP stimulation more noxious compared to their neurotypical participants. What does that word mean?
Noxious?
It sounds like poison.
Harmful, poisonous, or very unpleasant.
Yes.
Which is kind of the thing I was wondering about. But they said all of it. So did they mean, because I mean, touching your own arm isn't going to be negative, and they made it weird somehow.
Yeah, I mean, they did say it was worse during the touching. Hold on. They make a lot of really probably important, but not for this conversation, like comparisons.
Yeah. We're like trying to pull out the bits that are relevant for our
absolutely most
situation.
Important sentence.
Yeah. Just know that we read through large documents for you. No, we also love to do it. Hey, you listening to this podcast. If you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, there is one way to make sure that happens. Please go ahead, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. We have been told 5-star reviews can help us to get seen by more people, which means more people are going to learn about ADHD strategies.
Just press the button. Just give us a 5-star review.
So basically, we don't love it when other people touch our arms, or even when we touch our own arms in terms of how we're responding from a sensory perspective compared to neurotypicals, which I think for a lot of us is a bit of an oh moment because we've been talking about it, but I think the wider population have never really discussed that with ADHD, at least not that much.
They talk a little bit about sensory focus. It's sort of the construct that they're using instead of sensory processing disorder. But basically, the idea behind that is there's so much stimuli that we take in. We're not always noticing all of it. And so the buildup of the sensory stuff can really put a drain on your ability to self-regulate. I love my children, but I tell you, like, when I am overstimulated, the last thing I want is anyone to touch me, even to give me a hug to make me feel better. And it makes me feel so bad. But, you know, I'm not a bad mom. I just need like some deep breaths. I need to be seaweed.
Yeah.
Not a mom.
Yeah, exactly. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, there's an episode with Abby that you'll probably need to listen to for that context. But it is very much, I think, that idea we've talked about way back about co-regulation and maybe being aware of that if you're snapping, if you're like being like, I just need a break, I don't know what's going on. It might be that there's a lot of sensory stimulation happening that you might not have even registered. I mean, there's those jokes about people with ADHD like getting bruises and be like, what did that come from? Like they didn't even register that they walked into a table a couple of days ago. You know, it makes sense that we might not register this. I would be curious though, I feel like, and this is just personal, if I was in a room and I was lacking other sources of stimulation, like they turned out the lights, they blacked out the curtains, they did a whole bunch of like stuff to make this a very sterile environment in many ways. And then someone was like, okay, now you have to touch your arm. Yeah, that would probably feel quite intense. But I guess that's why they had all those controls as well to kind of say like, even with that experimental system in mind, it's more intense with ADHD.
And they also did indicate that when the touch and the pulse occurred on the same arm, it was even more intense for the ADHD group.
Wow. I have no idea what to make of that. That is interesting.
It's just compounding stimulation on top of stimulation. And it's like, the brain is like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with this. Yeah, interesting. So the next paper is a really, really good additional paper. So shout out to Sarah for finding this one because this paper looks at adjustments that they can make and a vision of what could be when we are not in an overwhelming sensory environment. And I personally love a paper that is looking at a potential positive future because there aren't heaps and it's worth talking about them when they are. So this paper is actually a pre-proof, but it has been revised and reaccepted, and it is slated for publishing in October of this year. It is from the Journal of Building and Environment. It's called Visual and Acoustic Discomfort, a comparative study of impacts on individuals with and without ADHD using EEG, basically. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to get a sense of discomfort in people who have ADHD with certain types of sensory, visual and acoustic specifically, and then thinking about what needs to be done in the future to have buildings that take these sensory needs into account, which is awesome. So how did they do it, Sarah?
So this is going to be another slightly horrifying description for some of you. So in a controlled laboratory setting, they basically created 6 different conditions. So there were 3 different levels of lighting, warm lighting, cool lighting, flickery. Those were the 3 options. And then there were also 3 different sound conditions to sort of accompany that. What do they call it? Classroom noise, white noise, and silent. it really paints a picture for me, classroom noise.
100%.
Shout out to all the teachers. Anyway, so they did like a combination of those 6 variables, and then they just put people in a room and introduced those conditions. They hooked them up to the EEG sensors. They had like a health monitoring bracelet, like a Fitbit. They did a little survey about their demographics, their ADHD status, and had them sit there for 5 minutes. And then they had them do a 2-minute on-screen task.
Mm-hmm.
They ran a couple of different scenarios is the right word. So all in all, these people were sitting there with the lighting and the sound levels changing for like 40 minutes.
That's a long time.
At the end, they had the gall to ask them, how comfortable do you feel?
Like, this is amazing. I fell asleep.
I feel like I would not remember each specific condition.
Yeah, well, it really depends. I mean, I think, like I said to you, Sarah, the noise, not so much, but the light. That's probably my one, more so than the noise. Would have been a lot. How did they do the light? Did they shine different lights in your eyes? I just want to know if they got that good blinking for a few seconds, because it takes a long time to turn on, overhead light condition, because that is the bane of my existence back in academia.
So it does tell us all about the room.
Great.
They had blackout curtains. There were 4 lamps, and they were seated in the middle of that. There's a picture.
Oh, I apologize. I think I got this paper confused with the other paper. It's the one with the picture, right? They've got that amazing picture if you read this paper.
Yeah, it looks like that person is ready to record like their Instagram stories. They've just got like these 4 giant Pixar lights boxing them in. And they have like a little cap, a little cap on them.
Yeah, it would be quite an intense scenario. So what did they find? Like, what did the EEG show?
Something really interesting. They found amongst the neurotypical participants brain activity that sort of alerted the person to the distressing stimuli.
Oh, interesting.
But the participants with ADHD did not have this brain activity alerting them of potential danger.
Wow.
And so basically what happens is these people aren't able to modulate their response to the stimuli that they are not noticing.
Are you saying that we didn't realize that it was happening? Or at least according to our brain. I imagine they knew it was happening, but our brain was like, yep, this is just a normal Tuesday.
Exactly. The brain is not sort of picking up on the uncomfortable environmental condition and sending the signal to the brain to like modulate that.
Wow.
What does it call it? A difference in neuro response.
Yeah. Gosh, that's interesting. If we think about this in real life, what we're saying is if you go into work and you've got those really big overhead lights, the ones that they have to like turn on in the morning and they're like, and you can hear them, those lights in your office. And maybe you have also a lot of noise, like your brain isn't registering that is happening. It's not like going like, oh, this is a lot. Maybe we should like modulate. It's just letting it happen to you.
Yeah, until we sort of get to a point where it's like, ooh, meltdown time.
Yeah, and then we're like, I'm out. I'm going outside. I can't handle this.
Now it's too late to be seaweed.
Yeah. But yeah, that is really interesting. That gives so much context. I mean, I've probably shared this story, but back in the day when I did university, you had to come in. It was a research thing I did where the rules were you had to come in for a certain number of days. And I would go there and sit down in that self-described room and do nothing, and then go home and get everything done. And I know that this is something that other people have done as well, because I've heard clients describe it too. So I think that is interesting that the oversensory stimulation might have been the reason. It's just like there was just too much going on.
Yeah, and that's definitely not like in one of the assessment screeners for ADHD.
No.
So even once you find out that you have ADHD, you don't necessarily stumble upon this information. which is why we're here bringing it to you
Yeah.
and highlighting the fact that there are actually people doing this research.
Yes. Yeah. It's really good to know because you're totally right, Sarah. Like this isn't being discussed as part of the diagnostic, but it is being discussed as part of the research. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate and about sharing and discussing the research, because it does go a little bit broader than people realize. If you find the preprint paper from somewhere, it's hard to find some of this stuff. And even if you can't find it, it's hard to access it. So, that does make a difference. But very, very cool. So what did they recommend? What do they think our buildings should look like in the future?
So I was actually super let down. No offense, guys, but they didn't really make any recommendations. They sort of just said that this should be considered super preliminary. There were limited conditions. We need to really look at more environmental variables. Like they suggested temperature, air quality. I was even thinking like texture. I know that sounds silly, but there might be certain ones, like certain chairs even.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much more they could do with this. But yeah, they pretty much just said like, hey, we did this paper so that people would do this paper again and again and again.
Fair enough. I mean, their goal was to prove that this, will not prove, obviously, but like to establish a correlation. And they did that. So, well done to them. And we want more of these papers as well. So if anyone's listening, we would like to see this stuff as well because it's so important.
I just want to say, I love how they found something amongst their control group. Right? That doesn't always happen either. So that's really funny. Like they found like a whole neural defense system population that they were not studying.
Yeah, that's so true. That's really, I will say both of these papers, and I'm excited to keep finding these papers. They're both so original. We've talked about a lot about survey papers, but a good experimental original paper, like it's really fun to see how they choose to do these studies because it does look really different. So yeah, two really, really interesting papers, and just a call out for more. If you know of any papers that are similar to this, or you know of anyone doing any of this kind of research, please let us know. We would love to talk about it because it is an understudied area that affects people literally every day, and it would be really nice for people to know about it. So yeah, that is us for this week. Take care, everyone. And yeah, take care out there in this oversensory stimulating environment. And we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening, everyone. And a big thank you to Adam for making us sound great and Anastasia for making us look great. We couldn't do it without you.
And if you're looking for any of the references to the papers that we discuss, head on over to our show notes page because I always bring the receipts.
Plus, if you want to find out more about us or any more deep diving into what we're doing, you can find us on Substack. That's where the community is. That's where we're chatting. And you can see all of the fun and exciting things that we are bringing to the table.
Thanks for being here.